So tell us a little bit about your backstory, maybe hurdles that you faced from being a person of color, and now the emotional impact of watching white people wake up to racism.
Wow, that's a compound
Multi-layers there.
Let's address those one at a time, if you would.
Yeah.
Which part first?
Maybe a little bit of your backstory.
Backstory, I'm 39 years old. I'm from Austin, Texas. I was born and raised there, but I kind of lived all over. As a kid, I lived in New York, I lived in California, I lived in Ohio, but mostly in Austin. Had a great childhood for the most part. Tough childhood in some ways, broken family. But yeah, there was a lot of activism in my humanitarianism in my house. Humanitarianism, Jesus. I was just swimming in the ocean, so there was a lot of humanitarianism in my house. My dad was a civil rights attorney. My mother is a journalist.
Wow.
So I grew up with the numbers. I grew up with the stories. I grew up with the experiences. I was 12 years old when I saw a man who was decapitated by white supremacists, his own neighbors. And my dad represented their family. We had white supremacists kill our dog when I was 13 because my dad was getting Confederate monuments taken down in Texas and trying to fight against having a Confederate Heroes Remembrance Day that Texas was having on Juneteenth.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So that's how I grew up. Went to an elementary school called Robert E. Lee Elementary, where I was indoctrinated with a song about how compassionate and kind and generous he was. And my brothers and I actually got in trouble because we wouldn't sing it. Yeah, it's almost as if it's like, obviously Black people are not a monolithic group, right? There's 40.2 million of us in America. But there's this very strange sort of almost waking state that we've all been walking around in. Not quite reality, not quite surreality, but it's like when you force a child to go to a school that's named after enslavers and human traffickers and rapists and genocidal maniacs and anarchists and people that were responsible for 1 million American deaths, and you're supposed to sing songs to them. I don't know what history is going to call that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What does that do to a person exactly?
Yeah. And also, what does that do to a country? What does that do to the history books? Like, what does that do
That's
to
like there being
story?
schools in Germany named after Hitler, and they're singing about what a wonderful person Hitler is.
Absolutely. There's really no difference. Like, I mean, like there's examples of it everywhere. If you look at Mount Rushmore, that literally is overlooking the Pine Ridge Reservation for the Sioux people. Those men are the people responsible for committing genocide on their ancestors. And they have to wake up every day and look at a mountain of the men who wanted them dead staring at them. We have a lot, and it's like, we don't have a lot of work to do. I think we have one thing to do, is dismantle white supremacy. Because that's not what the country, it's against the ideology of the country itself, right? If you look at like the Civil War, we never dictated terms to the losing side. Right? We never said, hey, this is what you got to do because you lost, because you tried to overthrow the government, and you gotta pay something for that. We just gave them their guns and their lands back and said, figure out a way to enslave these people legally, and they did through mass incarceration, through something called the Black Codes, which became the Jim Crow laws, which means that, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but in 1865, General William Sherman issued Special Field Order Number 15, which was a land reservation approved by Abraham Lincoln for freed slaves, for Black Americans. So we had a reservation that went from Charleston, South Carolina, down to the middle of Florida, and 30 miles inland. So like, this is really valuable land. And the land was given to till and to work for the Black Americans until they could buy it themselves. And that lasted for 2 years. And then the Union Army, the American Army, came and removed those people forcefully and put them in concentration camps. And for the next 5 years, about 200,000 Black Americans died in those concentration camps. And so we cover that history up.
Yeah.
And it's really fucking disgusting because you're basically, because racism is based in this. It's based in the foundation that the people that you kidnapped from their homes, that you stole from their families, most of them children, by the way, most of them, the average age was 15 years old, the people they stole from Africa. You have to put it into your mind that these are not human beings and they don't matter. And if that's what racism is predicated on, is that my ancestors were not human and they're not worth a second look. They're not worth a second look that they were put in the concentration camps. They're not worth a second look that they were raped at will or kidnapped at will or murdered at will based on a myth and a lie in the industrialization of commerce. And so it's almost like if your God is money, sure, you can become as rich as a king, but you have to destroy other people's humanity. What if there was a country that was doing what the colonies were doing today, right? Let's say, for instance, China were to go to Colombia and kill all the Colombians, and then go to Australia, kidnap all the aliens, and make them work in Colombia. What would we call that? What would we say?
Yeah.
And would we have a problem with
Right.
after that? Would we blame the Australians for what happened? It's a very strange thing. I think what racists are really afraid of is people finding out the real history of America. Because once we find out the real history of America, you know BLM has a point. It's basically saying this is common decency for people who've never been afforded it. And I think it really scares racists that history may be the sunlight that causes this ideology to wilt, right? The truth is what will cause this ideology to wilt. And that's why they've had to change the history. And so I think it's so funny when people say, well, you can't erase history. You're taking down the Confederate monument. Like, no. The reason the Confederate monument is up is because history is already erased.
Yeah.
We're trying to bring to light that you can't make moral examples of human traffickers, genociders, and rapists.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Are you at all worried that this is just a moment and not a movement? Like things will go back at some point to how it was? Absolutely
not. It's the oppressed people who tell you what country you live in. It's not the people who are silent. It's not the people who are sitting on Twitter protecting oppression. It's the oppressed people who've had enough who tell you where you live. It's what happened in the French Revolution. It happened in the American Revolution. It's what happens in every revolution throughout history. It's the oppressed people who say, so the oppressed people are holding the map, right? Because they're the ones traveling somewhere. We're the ones trying to get somewhere. So we're holding the map and we're saying, oh, no, we're here. This is where we are. And it doesn't matter who's with us and who's against us. At a certain point in time, how do I put this? So America has ignored itself into this situation. This is the place America has ignored itself into. Further ignorance would be dangerous.
Yeah.
Not coming from me. That's not a threat. I'm just saying that's history. Just read history. If you push people to a point where they're saying enough is enough and you can't hear the words enough is enough, how do you think that's going to come out? Like I'm a history buff, right? And are you guys familiar with Elie Wiesel? He's a Romanian-born author, died an American, but he wrote about the Holocaust. Wrote 56 books.
Wow.
Yeah, I read eight or nine of them. And my favorite author, by far, my favorite author. But if I could have dinner with anybody in space-time, it would be Elie Wiesel. And I would have a lot of questions for him. And I would ask him, I would say, once you felt the hate in the ether, and it was palpable, it was so palpable that it hurt your skin and ears. And that it was accepted, widely accepted, and enforced through policy and through societal interactions that it was okay to hate you and your people. How did you deal with the chronic stress of that? And then when they ghettoized you and they locked you into areas that were easily closed off, and the water supply was easily controlled, and the population density increased, and we know, sociologically speaking, with population density increasing, we know that quality of life goes down, crime goes up, health goes down. We know all, but they blamed you for it. How did you deal with the chronic stress of that? When they blamed you for everything in society and they scapegoated you and your voice was muted. So when you were yelling and screaming and saying, this is horrible, it has to stop, enough is enough, and nobody heard you because your voice was so muted, how did you deal with the chronic stress of that? When you came out of your house and you were hanging out in the street, boys will be boys, and you were 12, 13 years old, and there's no place to go in the ghetto, there's no parks, so you're hanging out in the street. And the Romanian people, the German people will walk by and they'd say, oh, the Jews. How did you deal with the disrespect of that? When you came out your house and you saw people you knew laying dead in the street in a pool of their own blood, having been publicly executed in broad daylight in their own neighborhoods, in front of people. Why? To make an example? And you knew that this person didn't do anything. But the Gestapo brings up what they did 4 years ago, or 2 years ago, or 6 months ago, but nothing that day.
Yeah.
How did you deal with the chronic stress of knowing that you could be next?
Yeah, and of course there's this comparison I'm about to make is not at all the same, but just for us and our listeners to gain a perspective on a minute level. Right now, there's a phrase being thrown around in the midst of COVID and the pandemic with COVID called caution fatigue, where because of the outbreak here, everybody's been on higher alert than they've ever been, and for now a sustained 4 months or so since we've been in this kind of lockdown era, and that people are seeing just from that small in comparison to what you're talking about here. extra release of cortisol, extra stressors that we're having because of what's going on here, and all of the, fearful thoughts that come with it. We're seeing all of us as a culture have to respond to that. Again,
which in a way is divine timing, because that's one of the only reasons why everyone got so heated about George Floyd is because everyone had been
pre-stressed. Yeah, where we had to look at this.
I would say that there's a lot of truth to that, but I would also say a small caveat. I think what happened was a lot of our white family in America got something that I call COVID compassion. Mm-hmm. So Mother Earth wants us to stop disrespecting her.
Yeah.
But we can't do that until we stop disrespecting each other.
Yeah.
Racism puts us in a perpetual state of existence in conflict. That means that we can't come together and cooperate on anything. Black people can't care about COVID. You can't care about the environment. You can't care about anything.
You're just trying to survive.
If someone like Elijah McClain's walking down the street, you can die. Yeah, we can't give a shit about any of that stuff.
No, you're in the survival mindset right now. It's not about getting deeper at this point.
Not even right now. We're always.
Your whole life, right?
And our entire lives are fight or flight. So what I'm saying is I think that a lot of people who are not in this chronic stress, in this fight or flight state, they experienced it for 2 months.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they realized that Black people experience this 12 months.
Yeah.
And they're like, wait, hold on. We can't, now that I know what this feels like.
Right, for a moment.
Yeah, because when you hear it, you can go, oh, when you see it, you go, oh, that's fucking horrible. Oh my God, we got to do something. And then you're like, what do you want for dinner?
Right. Your life goes on.
Yeah. You're like, okay, man, George Floyd, I'm like, what are you guys doing this with you? But when you feel it, when you feel the constant, like when you're sitting at home, you're going, I'm safer inside. If I go outside, I might die for no reason. I don't trust the government. I don't trust what anybody's telling me. That's how we always feel.
Right.
Yeah.
24 hours a day.
That's true.
Yeah.
So when you say, is this going to fizzle out? No, it's not, because we don't have another option.
Yeah.
We are at the end of, America has pushed Black people to a cliff and told us to build our dreams there. What happens to the dream? It either falls off that cliff or it falls on top of the people who are pushing you. But we're not going to let it crush us. It's just not going to, we can't. Like, crippling oppression doesn't lead to a dinner party.
Yeah. And that reminds me that I loved the way that you described and broke down privilege. Can you share some of that with our listeners?
Sure. Privilege is a human experience. So it's your human condition. It's a state of being. So I was born into male privilege, right? However, I don't have racial privilege. So I can look at, so if somebody comes to me and says toxic masculinity, that's a non-starter, right? Now, I'm not going to mansplain what they mean, but I will say this. What I think a better way to approach that is that, Mehcad, perhaps you haven't looked at how much power you actually have as a man in this country, and you can help change things for women and have more compassion for their experiences, for their stories, and how they're underappreciated and undervalued in our society.
Yeah, creating an invitation instead of blaming.
I can hear that, and I can do something about that. And I received that invitation in an indirect way through my mother about 5 years ago. And so I think when you approach the conversation of privilege to people, most people approach that conversation from an angry standpoint or a disappointed standpoint or a hurt standpoint.
Defensive, yeah.
Well, I think when people approach it,
the person who's bringing it up, they're angry for sure.
Because they don't have the privilege. But the thing is, when you run from, when you're defensive and you run from privilege, the problem is this: you're not accepting your own human condition, your own human experience, right? So, and people are making you feel bad about your own human condition and your own.
And you don't want to be responsible.
Well, you're not responsible for the position in which you were born. So here's privilege. Privilege is that person's ancestors, some of them good people, some of them bad people, set up a system in which benefited unfairly and disproportionately benefited their descendants. That's all it is. That's what it is. It's the condition in which you were born into. Nobody's at blame for that. So once you understand that's what it is, it becomes power, access, an unmuted voice, access to the levers of change, something that you are able to use as social currency to change, to alleviate the suffering of others. So I'm coining this term positive privilege, which is people understanding their own power. And I think
that's what I meant by responsibility.
Yeah. And I think what happens is this, and let's break down responsibility, because really it's 2 words. It's your responsibility. It's your ability to respond to anything that's put before you. So if privilege is put before before you, the human condition of being privileged is put before you, what is your ability to respond to that? Knowing that because of your privilege, because of the system you were born into, it is unfairly disadvantaged other people. It chips away at their safety and security and quality of life, right? And their mental health. So knowing that that's what it is, we can flip the conversation to believe the fact that you have that much power.
Yeah.
So I think what it is like people have been lied to about their own power. You've been told that you don't have it, but you do. You do.
Yeah. And so when someone says, you're privileged, we go, well, I'm not privileged. I had to work hard for all of this. But the reality is that if we could just say, actually, it empowers me because if I accept the fact that I am privileged, because now I can do something positive with it.
I have economic privilege because I worked really hard and I got it. I have male privilege because that's the condition, that's the human condition in which I was born into. I do not have racial privilege. And it's a very difficult thing. That male privilege kind of gets canceled out in some ways, in some ways it doesn't. That economic privilege gets canceled out in some ways, and in some ways it doesn't. But if you are born into our society if you're born into our society as a white male, you have a normal life. You have a normal life. You might have worked really hard. You might be from a poor family. You might have a long and winding road, but your road is not an obstacle course filled with booby traps that can kill you at any point in time or diminish your well-being, your dignity, your decency, and your mental health.
The bars are set relatively above everyone else. It's got, of course, you're saying it has its own levels within the white men born, at this time.
And we can just look at it like this, like look at life as a road, right? So that road may go up and down, it may be very hilly, it may be winding, it may be snaky, it may go around a lagoon, it may be a hard road to drive, but it's just a road. There's bombs and grenades and cops and obstacle course and booby traps on mine and on yours because you're women, right? So it's like privilege is really it's a state of being. And I think once people start realizing their own personal power, it's hard to believe, but white people in this generation have the ability, have the heroic invitation of actually being one of the heroes of the civil rights movement and alleviating the suffering of tens of millions of people. Why would you not want to take that? Why would you not want to be part of the greatest generation that's ever been? Like, why would you not want to take the spiritual invitation, the greatest spiritual invitation ever offered? It's never been on the table. Never been on the table. We have to ask ourselves a question peer to peer, not to our government. Do we want systems of crippling oppression to continue to exist? And that's the question that we can all ask ourselves. And the people who have privilege have the most power to stop that. But what I think America has always banked on is to make people feel powerless.
Yeah. And that's, and even like people being able to say, I stay out of politics, that's a privilege. And people that can hear this conversation and go on about their day and not think about everything you're saying, that's a privilege that you don't have.
It's a normal life.
And it's a privilege that a lot of people don't even, they say like, oh, I stay out of politics. And they don't realize in saying that, they're saying they're privileged, right?
Well, it's also very, and I'll just be 100% honest because that's what I do. Making a humanitarian effort political is creating a veil that protects you from taking a look at your own racial bias. There's nothing political about treating people with decency. Yeah. There's nothing political about removing the obstructions that.
Well, I wonder if is it a little political, because I'm wondering if it's different. In Germany, they don't have statues of Hitler. They have monuments to the Jews. Here, it's the opposite. And I'm wondering if it's because keeping it that way and keeping people of color poor, it keeps them rich, it keeps that divide. And that is, so it is a kind of a political agenda or not?
No, what I'm saying is they have made human decency a political thing.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And people who buy into that veil are using that veil to not have to look at the darkness inside of themselves. Yeah. Right. They're using that veil to not have to look at their own their own inconsistencies of humanity and how they look at people. Yeah. And so if you think about it, like I think if racist people or mainstream America, frankly, ever came to terms with the history, just the facts of how it's treated Black people and people of color in particular, but Black people in particular, then they would have to come to a reckoning of who they are.
Yeah.
They have to be like, okay, well, who does that make me? Shit.
Yeah.
I see the thing, I feel like we have a big dissonance amongst our fellow man right now. And I know you've brought this up in a conversation I've witnessed before, I think with Corey Allen, where we have this need for empathy in order for us to get all on the same page of collectively wanting unity, which is a lot of what you're speaking about here, right? Which is obvious. It seems obvious. That's what the direction we should all want to go. This is going to be great for all of us. It sounds amazing. Then we have this piece of us, like you spoke to toxic masculinity. We have this piece of us that says, well, don't feel your feelings, because that's what our culture says it's, not good to do. It's just, it's not productive. It's not glorifying busy the way we all do if we stop and start feeling our feelings. So we have this big divide that is created in mainstream America because we are not allowing that part of our character. We have suppressed the part of us, the feminine part of us, you could name it that way if you wanted, that says, hey, take a look at how you're treating your fellow man and feel it as if it was you, because it is you.
Yeah. And I mean, that's perfectly put. Like, I think another way to say that is like, to your point, I should say, the feminine, I don't believe in divine feminine, divine masculine. I believe that that's our own gender bias.
The words are, and the binary thing is tough. All of it's tough.
It's weird, right? Like, it's like, so we have to structure divinity into.
Has to be polarizing again, yeah.
And I think what happened was, I think the reason we do that is because we discredited things that women were excelling in after the Reformation. About 500 years ago, we said intuition, bullshit. Nurturing, bullshit. Compassion, bullshit. Things that women leadership were excelling in throughout history, we minimized. And we diminish the value of it. And so we don't look at our feelings, right? We're not intuitive. We're not compassionate. We don't see another human being. When someone says enough is enough, or my life matters, we go, well, let's argue about the subtle nuances of the words that you used. Yeah. Right? Rather than going, wow, there's a human being in front of me. Right. Yelling that his life or her life matters. And, well, how did we get there? So instead of even having that conversation, it's more about intellect and logic and rationality, which is what the Reformation, the pulse of consciousness, the Reformation created, right? And started to value as the metric of
macho is. I mean, it's like enoughness. It's like, okay, well, that's the level you have. That's a standard.
Of human value, right? And so we didn't value a lot of the things that the feminine nature had pursued, and we devalued those things so that they wouldn't have a place in society. But I strongly believe COVID is trying to balance that out. Right? Like, I strongly believe Mother Earth wants that. She wants more intuition.
She's a mother.
Yeah. She wants intuition to be valued like intellect, as it should be. Absolutely should be. 100%.
It is. It's balancing. I mean, it's intellect's balancing other. I mean, it's necessary to have both. Yeah. There's. I mean, we could dive so much deeper into that. And what else came up for me while we were discussing how to help people understand the plight here. And I don't even know if that's the right word, but the way that, mainstream America is trying to process this. And I know that process is also a tricky word because it asks for more patience and more burdening of the same people that are already the ones taking on the burden of this whole thing for their entire lives and generations before. But one way to maybe further illustrate it that came to mind, so I'm just going to say it, is when we think about the Amazonian rainforest, for instance, and we think about the farmers there that are selling their land to turn it into cattle farms for American meat, or European meat to be farmed on, and this type of thing. And the world looks at that, the people who are in environmental, trying to protect the environment, trying to protect what we call the Amazon the lungs of the world. So worried about how many football fields worth of jungle is being destroyed and how much oxygen we're not going to have because of that, and going, how can these farmers be selling off their land? And the farmers in the Amazon are going, I can barely feed my fucking kids tonight. I'm living in a fight or flight state. I am living from this more primal mind because I have to. I have no other choice. I was not born with the privilege to be in a place, in America and sit back and look at at the Amazon and go, well, you're doing it wrong. And look at the farmer in the Amazon and say, well, you're doing it wrong. It's like,
right.
how, I mean, and then we judge that. And that's where we grow that dissonance of like using the logic and the intellect, like you're saying, but not using the empathy and the intuition of like, what is this farmer actually experiencing? And I'm just bringing that up because for me, illustrating this from a different point sometimes helps. It helps me get to the end of it.
Perfect analogy. It is speaking from a position of expertise when you know nothing about the subject.
Right.
And you haven't taken the time to be compassionate or empathetic about someone's situation. And once you take a look at what they're going through, or take a look at what or actually even like listen to their concerns.
Yeah. Really listening is something we're not good at in this culture at all. Like actually what that is.
No. We have to rediscover the art of listening. And I think we're getting there.
I hope so.
I think I've seen examples of people listening more intently in the last 2 to 3 months than I've ever seen.
I agree.
Ever in my life.
But their world had to get a little quieter.
Yeah.
They had to be stuck inside, not be able to go to the movies or music shows. So
no distraction. Yeah.
And once again, to touch on that COVID compassion soundbite, is the ancient brain was massaged for the first time in thousands of years, and at least for Western culture. And it was like, wait a second, what's important is survival. That's weird.
Yeah.
Hold on. Yeah.
We have been cruising and coasting for a long time, and all of a sudden we're like, wait, we're not safe. This is chaos. The world is chaos. It always has been. It always will be, and we have to be able to hold it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that, and I think you're right, except for I don't think it always has to be. So there's a Sanskrit phrase called Satchitananda, right? And Sanskrit's a prayer. So you say, when you pray, you say things in the order in which they should be accomplished. So Sat means existence, is consciousness, and Ananda is bliss. And so the more I study Sanskrit, I'm realizing that there's a reason that they said it in that order. So we're in a state of existence, and we have existence. It's a hell of an existence. We make it hard to experience that existence because we add difficulty and weight to that existence. So I think we're leaving the state of existence into the state of consciousness. We're leaving the state of existential beings and becoming conscious beings. And I think we're going to start expressing ourselves as conscious beings. And the more people like you and I have, the three of us have this conversation, the more people that your listeners go out and talk to, I think that we're going to be stepping out of the state of existence. Because what is existence? It's existing. It's just not dying.
Yeah.
It's coasting, like you said, right? But what's the state of consciousness?
I think this is
enriching.
Say that again.
It's enriching the existence.
Enriching, yeah. And I think to speak to your point about the suffering that comes with existence, the suffering to me is the way we alchemize getting to consciousness, or that's how it's been experienced in my life, is like, and now I can even recognize like, I'm in this deep suffering. I'm like, all right, girl, let's go all the way in, because I know now that at the other side of it, if I don't resist it as much, I have more grace and ease getting through it, but I still suffer, and I still have to suffer, it feels like, to get to the other side. And then you grow.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing with the sociological body consciousness, right? It's the same thing with the collective consciousness.
Yeah.
Like the collective consciousness wants to heal from the last 500 years of hatred and bigotry, vitriol. It wants to heal from that. It had a traumatic intervention that was called the industrialization of commerce, or the transatlantic slave trade. That wasn't good for the collective consciousness. That was horrible for it. That was a really damaging time for it. And I like to think it's part of its adolescence, right? I like to think that human beings are going to be here for a very, very long time. But that's up to us.
Right.
It's up to us. And so I think that we're getting to a place where, in the adulthood of our collective consciousness, like this, we can't do this.
Yeah.
We have to step out of the state of being existential beings into the state of conscious beings. And then that will lead us, I think, a few centuries from now, maybe a millennia from now, into blissful beings. And like that's what we have to do, for not just for our children, but for, I don't know how people can't look at their descendants and just feel an overwhelming sense of love for them. Right? The people who are going to be here 400 years from now. They're only here because we did this right.
Right.
Because if we don't do this right, there's not going to be anything left.
You're talking, though, from a place of an amount of consciousness that ever even has a glimpse of seeing what our descendants might look like, ever seeing that there is a possibility for that. I think the majority of us are living from a much more finite future, you know, within our lifespan, really. And you're also talking, I know just from listening to other talks, you're not really from a place of linear time. You're talking from a different place, which is, you know, something I do think the paradigm shift you're talking about of consciousness and coming to or back to a more collective state of consciousness, I think is when we sit with the truth, you know, when we really dig down deep and decide who we are and what we are, and we get to the bottom of the existential questions, and it's not even, of course, ever answering the existential question, but getting to the best question we can make, right?
Yeah.
When we get there, we then feel the kind of epiphany that you're talking about of like, oh shit, like my existence is critical for all generations to come. It's critical for all the generations that were before me, because it was their hope that I would be where I am and transforming and transmuting and becoming this other thing. So holding all that is the bliss, you know, that you're talking about. How do we get people to have that moment of momentary bliss? Because you only need a couple moments, you know, in your lifetime really to hold on to and inspire you to do your life's purpose, your life's mission, and serve others.
Outside of psychedelics.
Yeah. I mean, we could talk about that too, but
not
we do
everybody's
that a lot on
willing
the show.
to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I understand. And like, I mean, I'm of both schools of thought. Like, I think that psychedelics are a cheat code, right? And I love cheat codes. Great. I'm all for the cheat codes. However, not everybody's going to play the game with codes.
Right.
Yeah.
So people who aren't playing the game with cheat codes, I think that they have to rediscover the art of doing that.
Presence.
Yeah. And it's presence. And when you sit in silence, you connect to the center of your center. Doesn't matter what you thought 5 minutes ago, doesn't matter what you thought about your life, doesn't matter what ideas and games and veils that you have been engaged in or that you're seeing through. There's just this presence of gravity and love and structure that's at the center of your center. It's 14.5 billion years of divine evolution running through the center of your center. And you know what's moral. You know what feels right.
Right. That is the truth.
You know it. Yeah. There's this very, very simple truth that the foundation. So I truly believe that when we decided to come back into these bodies and cultivate this planet, we agreed that it would be founded in love. The foundation had to be love. And the farther we get away from that love, the more conflict we have. The more we fight ourselves, the more we don't know who we are, the more we have bad people in our lives, the more we attract the wrong people in relationships, the more we physically fight each other, the more we oppress each other, the more we go to war with each other. It happens on a macro scale, on a micro scale. So like, I think that just centering yourself and finding that universal gravitational system of love. So I believe gravity and love are the same thing. Like, what else attracts something throughout the universe and holds it? What is this metaphysical sort of multi-dimensional power that's able to pull something and hold it? What's that called in your normal life? When you pull something to you and it's just there. You're attracted to it, right? It's attracted to you. That's love.
Yeah.
So the force of gravity to me is love. It's what holds the universe together. And so once you really get in touch with the center of your center, and that is a thin piece of gravity that is running through the body. You feel the love from the universe stabilizing you on the planet, stabilizing you on this ball throughout space and time. And there's a lot of, the more you sit in silence, the more you sit in presence, there's so much information that comes back to you that intuition, empathy, all these things that we've overlooked. And it's just the simplest answer. It's just that the three of us on this call are just different expressions of the same thing.
Yeah.
That's what we are. And if we want to fight about that, we can, but why the fuck would we waste our time? Why would we do that? Why don't we try to use that same energy to figure out why the three of us are so different from the same expression? And figure that out. We're going to colonize Mars in 4 years. Are you telling me that I have to explain to my grandson 15th century Portuguese politics to explain to him why he's not welcome on 2 planets?
Right.
That has to stop. We got to stop that.
Yeah.
What words do you have for those who they do feel all this in their center and they know that this is a humanitarian crisis, but they're so scared to say something wrong, or they don't feel like they have anything good enough to say to enlighten anybody on it, that they're just staying silent?
Then I would say that they don't understand that it's a humanitarian crisis.
That's good.
You can't know that something's a humanitarian crisis and then stay silent. Or you can, but then that makes you a certain type of person with a certain type of consciousness. If you know that this is a humanitarian crisis and you go, well, I don't want to piss off some of my racist friends, or I don't want to piss off, or I don't want to say the wrong thing. Well, you can't say the wrong thing. It's all fucked up.
Right. I think that's the focus is it is messy. Yeah. Like this is messy. It's not going to be perfect. Choose progress over perfection. Like every time, just say that mantra over and over to yourself.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm gonna write that down. I did. So I'm starting a podcast. And I love for you guys to do it. My first guest is her name is Joyce Ross. She is the Auschwitz survivor who showed up to the BLM protests outside of Chicago.
Cool.
Wow.
And I asked her, I said, why did you show up to the BLM protests? You're 97 years old, right? Like, I hope I'm out like, wow, way to go, Miss Joyce.
Yeah.
And I asked her, and I said, what compelled you to get up out of your living room and go? And she said, well, when I saw that knee on Mr. Floyd's neck, I knew that they were bad. That's what they did to us. And I said, wow. And then we had a 35-minute conversation. And then towards the end of the conversation, I asked the question, I said, do you think, and this is all going to be the podcast, do you think that if the good Polish people, she's Polish, good Polish people and the good German people, if they had taken a stand, they had done something, said something, she goes, it never would have happened. She goes, people just kind of went on with their lives, not really knowing what to do. And that's what scares me now.
Yeah.
This can never happen again. And it wasn't me making the comparison. I saw her at the BLM rally and I started crying because I had made the comparisons in my own head, but like in this country, you're not really allowed to do that publicly, right? Because I think all ethnicities have trouble communicating an atrocity that's specifically happening to them across ethnic lines, right? We have trouble communicating things that specifically happen to ethnic groups across ethnic lines, period. But in particular, things that aren't happening to other people.
Right.
It's very hard to describe that and how bad that is to other people. And, Native American people have the word genocide. And our Armenian brothers and sisters have the word genocide, and our Jewish brothers and sisters have a couple words: Holocaust and anti-Semitism. And there's when your atrocity is that bad,
right?
You have a word.
It's labeled.
I think the problem that Black America has is that we don't have a word yet. But it's time for the global community to acknowledge that we deserve a word.
Yeah,
we deserve a word. That's how bad it's been.
Because it acknowledges it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how, and it protects you. It protects you from it. Like, so it's a flag. Sorry, it's a sword, it's a shield, and it's a flag, right? It's a sword that you can use against somebody and go, you're a racial oppression denier. So I don't have to fucking listen to you. What else do you deny throughout history?
You have a word that you want to use for it?
There's a word that came out of a think tank about a month ago called knee-neck. A knee-neck.
Yeah.
Someone who knee-neck. So it's
very visual.
Yeah, and it's like it makes total
sense.
And
it's not actually new.
And there's something really disgusting and vile and sick about the infatuation that white supremacy has with Black necks. Right? There's something there, like cutting off the breath, cutting off the oxygen, cutting off the voice, cutting off the blood to the brain. There's something there about that. And the knee necking actually comes from the Roman Empire. It's like the Roman legionnaires would kneel on the slaves' necks. And it happened again in Viking culture, it happened again in English culture, and it happened again in Nazi culture, it's happening again now. And it really is time for the world to acknowledge that we need a word. So when you tell me, or you ask me, am I afraid that this movement will fizzle out? No, I'm afraid of other things. I'm afraid of where this crippling oppression will lead in 10 years. I've done the math. You got 4 or 5 options, and only 2 of those are peaceful. And one of those is making sure that another one doesn't happen.
Right. And that's why this won't fizzle out, because the other options are no good for nobody.
Right. And on that, we spoke on those who are being silent. Those who do want to be a hero in this story, what are their action steps?
Well, one is becoming part of your human community, seeing the person who doesn't look like you, who has a different experience than you. So here's the thing. If you don't believe people who are out in the street crying, laying on the ground, saying, I can't breathe, saying enough is enough, yelling from the top of their lungs, if you can't hear their ancestors screaming through their skin, if you can't hear their voices, well, racial oppression deniers never do that. People who want to protect oppression never hear the voices of the oppressed, do that, throughout history. So you have to ask yourself,
how do we bring them around?
You have to ask yourself who you are. There's one race, there's 2 tribes. There's people who want to who want to end oppression, and there's people who want to protect it. If you don't believe that oppression is happening, you are protecting it.
Right.
The conversation's over. Discussion's over. We're not going to discuss whether it's happening. That's a ploy. That's a tactic. That's a tactic of psychological warfare that's been used throughout time to diminish the voice of the person being oppressed.
And it's really like a logical fallacy. It's looping. It's not, we're not getting anywhere there.
It's gaslighting. It's gaslighting. It's like, okay, so let's just break it down in the most simple way possible. George Floyd was publicly executed in his own neighborhood. He was not murdered. He was pulled from the car, put in front of the vehicle, and kneeled on by 4 guys, 4 big men. And one had his knee on his neck, and we saw the whole thing. We don't have to get into it. But broad daylight, wasn't resisting arrest, nothing. Broad daylight, almost so nonchalantly that it looked like the murderer felt like, the executioner felt like, well, you got to put these animals out of their misery, right? Dehumanizing a person in such a way where I can publicly execute them with a smile on my face, my hand in my pocket, and dig my neck into it, and dig my knee into his neck. And then the country has a conversation about if that matters. That is where we are. So when you see that happening, and more so, more distressing, when you see the conversation, the debate that happens after that, if that matters, we're in a new place.
So that is my question. So all that you've just explained, that is where we are, as you said. And it's maddening, of course, in a lot of ways, but that is where we are as a collective. So how do we at this point and especially people of color, how do people of color continue to have patience in the midst of watching non-Black people come around, like still waiting for that to happen?
And they've already had for generations.
It's like, okay, well, great. We're having the conversation now, but it's like, why are we even having, it's frustrating. Like, why are we even having that part of the conversation that we already know is completely spelled out, and we should be moving on to the part of how we resolve this thing, but we're still stuck here. And it's like, how much patience do we give to this? And so that is the question. How do we do that?
Well, I think there's 2 parts to that. And so obviously Black people and people of color obviously are not a monolithic group. I can't speak for all of them, but I can say this. I'm a millionaire and my patience is running thin. The average Black family makes $17,000 a year. What do you think their patience is?
It's gone, non-existent.
It's gone. So white supremacists have unleashed their psychopaths on Black people for over 400 years. And most of white America, and most of America, period, no matter what color you are, has pretty much ignored that. In large part. Not completely, but in large part. And the Black world has never hit back. We've had patience. We've had compassion. We've had forgiveness, transcendent compassion, transcendent forgiveness. It's been transcendent. We've had these dumb conversations time in and time again for decades, for centuries. We've been saying this is a humanitarian crisis for over a century. We've been saying that.
Yeah, without a choice.
And no one listens because our voices are so muted. So how do we have more patience? I don't know. Like, I don't know how somebody could have more
What's
patience.
the other option? Yeah.
I know. Yeah.
The other options are trying something different. And like, I mean, you have peaceful versions of that, which look like refugee status, which is very embarrassing in the United States, but it is what it is. Like you have to do what's best for your family. And I know that those talks are already starting, sadly. Those talks have already started with, I won't say what countries because I'm not allowed to yet, but I know that those talks have already started in some places. And it's more about how many can they let in. But in about 2 weeks, you guys might hear about this. It might be international news that there are some countries that are willing to offer refugee status to Black Americans, that's where we're at. That's where we're at. And there's another one where, there's a school of thought where Black people and anti-racists, no matter what color you are just saying, let's boycott the economy. Let's boycott anybody who's not actively and staunchly anti-racist because we don't know if our money's going to be going to white supremacy. We don't actually know. So there's people creating infrastructures to aid that cause. But I think the patience is, I don't think there is anymore. I have transcendent patience. My family has transcendent patience, but my mom's at the point now where she wants to leave America. I have family members. Listen, look, my family, my great-grandfather was killed by the NYPD. Sorry, let me start at the beginning. My great-grandmother was a refugee from Florida and Georgia to New York, a refugee in her own country, because she was tired of being raped and having her house burned down in the South. And she came from a Native American reservation. So she hitchhiked and walked to Harlem in 1915.
Wow.
She got there, she married a man, half Irish, half black man, who was eventually killed by the police, leaving her with 7 children.
Wow.
And 2 of her children were killed by the police. And then another one of her children was killed by a white mob. And her sister had her fetus cut from her body at a party as an entertainment. So when you talk about patience, we've had it. We've had patience. We were chandeliers at parties where they would hang us at parties and stick candles inside of us. If we were sick, when you find out the history of what America has done and allowed to happen to my family and to people who look like me, it's almost like you're astounded by the patience. You're astounded by the forgiveness. It almost looks like we look weak, right? But it's that we knew that there have been so many massacres. There's been so many massacres that people don't talk about. There was 300 people killed in one day in Tulsa in 1921. There was 1,000 Black people killed in the summer of 1919. 32 white terrorist attacks. There was over 100 people killed in one day in Rosewood. And every single time that we've had Black communities that have done well and self-aggrandized, white supremacists have bombed them, literally bombed them, sometimes from the air in airplanes. 1921, they used airplanes to bomb Tulsa because they didn't like the fact that there was well-to-do Black people there. This is real. This has happened to us time in and time out. And so when you ask the question about patience, I don't have an answer for you. But I can tell you on the other side, what white people who want to help can do is listen, believe us.
And that's what's so frustrating about people posting that Black Lives Matter is a leftist lie, because there's history to prove that it's not a leftist lie. So it's so mind-boggling that that's even a popular thought right now.
Well, it's once again, what it does is it allows, it relinquishes them of any responsibility, having to look at their own racial bias. It's the easy way out, right? It's the easy way out of saying, here's the thing. The multidimensional experience of being Black in America is that you love your country. Somehow you still love this country.
Right.
But you also fucking hate it. Like, for what it's done to you, what it continues to do to you, how it treats you, how it doesn't believe you, I think history will refer to this as a well-structured genocide, a slow-moving genocide. I think history will refer to this as that. Once you start to put the numbers together, you can't say, well, it's not that because, it's been 400 years and that's just what it is. And like, add the numbers up. Tell the families that. Tell the families that lost the breadwinner tell my family that lost the breadwinner in the 1930s because he got arrested for driving and then they killed him. Mm-hmm. So you have to start thinking about like how the abusive relationship America has with Black people, and that has to be repaired. And I think that people who are saying, oh, this is a leftist lie and this and that, just don't want to admit that there needs to be repair. This has to be repaired. So you can't move forward as a country unless you repair the past.
Right. Yeah. And
it's the same thing. It's one and the same.
A lot of people are using statistics to support their racially biased view, but you also think about who's making those statistics, as well.
Yeah. The thing about statistics is this, like, for whatever statistic you can find, I can find one.
Yeah. And also you may use those statistics, but like it's also the culture you brought them up in. It's what was forced upon, these communities.
Yeah. So when people show me these statistics, I go, yes, that's the problem. Mm-hmm. Yes, what you just brought up, that's the problem. But it's the consciousness thing. Somebody looks at the statistic and they go, well, look at the statistic. This is horrible, and they go, it's the people's fault who were engulfed in this statistic. I go, no. How did we get there?
Yeah, it's like a baby. It's like a baby that only knows how to crawl, and they have 4 toys in the room, and they crawl to the one that's closest. It's like that's what we've done to these communities. We put them in crime-ridden communities. We keep them poor, and
it's
then
a sociological factor. Like when you have underserviced communities, crime goes up. When you have desperation, right. Crime goes up. That's sociological. Like it's so. I think it's really interesting that it's hard for America sometimes how do I put this? It's hard for America sometimes to attribute human behavior to Black people. Like you throw people in a situation where they can't get out, you redline them so they can't get out of the hood. They're stuck in a situation where they're severely oppressed and suppressed and their voices are muted. And then so what happens? They feel desperate.
Right.
And like, so crime goes up, quality of life goes down, you know, life expectancy goes down. These are sociological factors. These are human factors.
Product of their surrounding, yeah.
Right. This happens to every group of people that you put into that situation.
Right.
So it's almost as if it's such a racist trope to use numbers and statistics without looking at the historical factors that got you to those statistics. And it's a level of consciousness. It's like you're looking at the same chart and graph and you're saying it's the people, it's their fault, but you're acting as if that life wasn't that.
That's kind of what Candace Owen was saying too, which makes it also fuels people's racial bias and agenda because they're able to say, well, she's a person of color. You know?
That's the people who, I love this question. The people who use Candace Owens as their response are ignoring the other 40 million voices.
Right.
Yeah.
Just because
it's like the same thing.
And if you're going to listen to Candace Owens and say, like, maybe she's educated and you're educating yourself, then you've also got to read books like White Fragility. Like, you can't just educate yourself on that side and then choose to not hear the other side.
Right. And well, I mean, here's the thing. Let's be honest about Candace Owens. That's not even a side. She's making shit up. She's half of the numbers that she's talking about are made up. They're just made up. She just made them up. Like she can't, like I had a friend who interviewed the other day asking her where she got her numbers from. She couldn't say it. So it's like, she's just making shit up. And that's what most people are doing when they're talking about statistics. Once again, when you're talking about statistics, who paid for the research?
Right.
Who does it benefit?
Right.
And whatever statistic you can find, I can likely find another statistic that's so particular that it can negate your statistic. The question I ask people is this: when you show me a chart and graph, why do you blame the people that are affected by the chart and graph rather than all the historical factors that led up to that chart and graph being true? Even if it's, let's say it's true, let's say those horrible numbers are true. Some of them are and some of them not. What led up to what are the historical factors that led up to that chart and graph being an issue? And like, if you're looking at a chart and graph in a vacuum, okay.
Yeah, it's
you don't have
cherry
a point.
Picking and you
don't have a point.
Right.
Yeah,
there's all kinds of holes in that logic. And I don't even like using the word logic because again, it needs to be balanced with the intuition and consciousness. So
just history.
Well, I want to explore what we've discussed really thus far about how we go about helping people get to a place on their journey, and coming back to the patience piece of being patient enough with someone who isn't, very far maybe on this journey and who has got a lot of road to cover ahead of them. How do we set the stage for that to happen better? How have you, since you've been now having a lot of conversations about this in recent time, especially publicly, how have you gone about inviting the public who's willing to actually listen to come along instead of creating more of that dissonance that happens whenever we, dig
and
our
doing
boots
the good
down.
guy, bad guy.
Yeah.
Like my stepbrother does not believe in privilege. And if I get angry at him and just, make him the bad guy because he doesn't see what's really happening, he's not, what change is that going to happen or cause?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things so the question is mostly about how do we get people who are.
I really want to know from you, on a personal level, how have you noticed yourself evolving in the way that you're able to, like we started this conversation out with, invite people to come to this realization
and maybe
on
not
their own?
Dehumanizing the people who aren't realizing it.
Well, that's part of the process probably. But what has been your experience in that part of the journey of like getting people to come over with their own growth and consciousness as opposed to using force to, push people and then they dig deeper into their boots